Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jeremy Leffler and I work in the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Spring 2022 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. And I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover proposal preparation. And this session will be presented by Gene Feldman, Randy Phelps, and Jennifer Wade.
Well, welcome to the Spring 2022 NSF Grants Conference, the proposal preparation session. We're delighted you are all here with us today, and we hope we will be able to share a lot of very useful information and to answer your questions regarding proposal preparation at the National Science Foundation. Next slide, please. I am delighted to be joined by two program colleagues at NSF. My name is Gene Feldman. I'm head of the Policy Office at the Division of Institution and Award Support, and we are part of the Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management. Let me turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Randy Phelps. I'm a staff associate in the Integrated Activities Office in the Office of the Director. By training, I'm an astronomer, but I've been in OIA for 15 years almost now. So I coordinate the Major Research Instrumentation Program, our Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure Program, and as we always say, other duties as assigned. So turn it over now to Jennifer.
Thanks, Randy. I'm Jennifer Wade. I'm a program director in the Division of Earth Sciences, mainly with the Petrology and Geochemistry program, although as Randy says, also other duties as assigned.
Thanks to the both of you. Next slide, please. Well, we've got a lot of topics to cover as part of this presentation today. We're going to start with how you find those funding opportunities at NSF. A bit about what is, for many, the backbone of NSF's policy documents, the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. We're going to cover the types of proposal submissions that you may see in NSF funding opportunities, what the sections are of an NSF proposal, including how those sections are used as part of the proposal review process. Finally, we're going to cover two sections, two supplementary documents that we often use at NSF, the postdoctoral mentoring plans and the data management plans. And we end at the bottom of this slide with basically what our mantra is as part of these conferences. Ask early, ask often. And we hope you will take the opportunity to do that. Between the three of us, we have extensive experience at NSF, and we look forward to helping you navigate this session. Next slide, please.
All right, so there are a few ways to find funding opportunities on nsf.gov. So first, you can just go straight to the funding tab and get a lot of the information that we're presenting today. Policies, due dates, specific opportunities for students or postdocs. Next. In addition, if you scroll down on the main NSF page, you'll find a quick little search box that lets you search on a specific keyword or get some quick links to the policy guide, upcoming deadlines, other information. Next. There's also a main award search page where you can look up basically any award that's been made by any part of NSF. So if I type in a keyword here, it'll bring up a list of awards and I can find out who was funded, at what institution, for how much money, and by what program. And this is really helpful if you're trying to figure out like which program your research fits into. Next. And of course, there's always in grants.gov a similar feature to look for your own topic and to see which agencies and programs have funded work in that area, because NSF is not the only place where that might fund work that you do. Next. So once you know which program you want to apply to, you need to get a proposal together. And the first document to be familiar with is the PAPG, or the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. So this document is incredibly useful and tells you almost everything you need to know about submitting to NSF. Next. So it contains guidance for preparing and submitting proposals. It tells you how proposals will be reviewed, explains why a proposal might be returned without review, explains how to withdraw a proposal, and then it has all the policies to know if you get an award. Next. So the proposal guide also lays out the different kinds of funding opportunities that exist. And each one's a little bit different, and you want to make sure that you know which kind of opportunity you're submitting to before you start preparing a proposal. So I'm just going to step through these. So there's a program description, which just sort of lays out what are the goals of this program, and then you follow all the guidance in that policy document, the PAPG. There's a program announcement, also very similar to a description, just sort of the only guidance you need is whatever's in the PAPG. The next level is a program solicitation. And program solicitation, we're going to step through what this means, but a solicitation might have extra requirements, extra documents, extra formatting, extra eligibility requirements that we'll talk about. So a solicitation might have a bunch more information. And if you're submitting to a solicitation, you want to make sure that you're following the guidance in both the PAPG and the solicitation. And then there's Dear Colleague letters. So Dear Colleague letters are basically sort of an announcement about a special opportunity or special competition, and it'll tell you which guidance you need to follow in there. Next. So in any funding opportunity, you want to make sure that you understand a few key components. So first is the goal of the program. Does your proposed research, your institution, you as a PI, do you fit within that goal? The second is eligibility. So are you, as a PI, or even just your institution type, are you eligible to submit to that program? And then the third is you want to make sure that you're meeting any special proposal, preparation, or award requirements that might be specific to that program or announcement. And the way to find that out is to really read the details of whatever opportunity you're submitting to. Next. So I think the majority of funding opportunities at NSF involve a solicitation. Mine program does. So let's use this as an example of how to figure out whether an opportunity is right for you. So this is a screenshot of the career solicitation. So you can see there's a solicitation number up at the top, and that's really helpful to make sure you're applying to the right place. The solicitation will tell you which directorates or offices are participating in the solicitation. And then it will also describe any recent revisions. So you might be super familiar with a program, you've submitted to it before, but you want to keep in mind that we revise some of these fairly often. So even if it's a program that you've submitted to before, you want to make sure that you check this section. Next. So on the solicitation cover page, it also will tell you how many awards the program expects to make and how much money that program has to spend. Next. So next, as you scroll down on a solicitation page, you'll find that critical eligibility information. So what kinds of institutions can submit? Who can be a PI? Is there a limit on how many proposals an organization can submit, or you as a PI can submit to a program? Next. Okay, the solicitation will also tell you whether there's a deadline that you need to submit to. So there are a few different types of targets that exist at NSF. So some programs, like mine actually, have no deadline. So a proposal can be submitted anytime that it's ready. Next. Some programs have target dates, which means there's sort of a semi-rigid deadline. So the program wants proposals to come in by a certain date, but they might be flexible for certain reasons. And it's always critical to contact the program director if you think you're going to miss a target date. Next. The firmest type is, of course, a deadline date, which means proposals will not be accepted at all past 5 p.m. submitters local time. So deadlines cannot move unless something truly exceptional happens. So these are the submission types that we always especially remind people to start working towards very early, just in case. Next. The last submission type is a submission window, which sort of acts like a deadline, but there's also a starting date for submissions as well. So again, you want to make sure you understand which of these kinds of deadline, no deadline, target date sort of things the program that you're submitting to has. Next. The last two submission types we want you to be aware of actually come before a full proposal gets submitted, and those are letters of intent and preliminary proposals. So letters of intent are short letters that PIs submit stating that they intend to submit a full proposal to a program. So if one's required, it will say so in that solicitation or other opportunity document. It's not a binding document. It's just something that some programs, especially programs that are either really big or maybe they're new, so it's unclear, they're not sure yet how many proposals are going to come in. We use those to sort of plan ahead what we'll need in the program in terms of reviewers or panelists. Next. So preliminary proposals are a little bit longer than the letter of intent and can serve another purpose, right? So they do help the program plan ahead in terms of reviewers, but it can also be used as a sort of preliminary round of review. So it might be that you submit a preliminary proposal and then are not invited to submit a full proposal because maybe the program doesn't think the project is the right fit. So this saves you as a PI from writing a whole giant full proposal. So again, it's really important to read the solicitation or dear colleague letter or whatever opportunity you're submitting to make sure you understand what's required, not just when you submit the full proposal, but even before you submit that full proposal. And as always, reach out to the program with questions beforehand if you have them. It's a lot easier to fix things before something's been submitted to NSF than after. And I think Randy is next.
Okay, thank you. So I'll continue on talking about individual portions of the proposals, starting with the single copy documents. And there are a lot of bullets and a lot of words on a lot of these slides, but I would like to take my time to talk about some of my experiences with these types of portions of the proposals. So with single copy documents, I just want to remind you that these are portions of the proposal that only NSF will see. So make sure that any portion of the proposal that is supposed to be viewable by reviewers is not put in the single copy documents because that is not going to be seen by those reviewers. Some of the important parts of a single copy document are the list of suggested reviewers to include or not to include. You can include those, and it's especially important for multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary proposals, where when a proposal is sent to a particular program, that program may not have a full understanding of all the scientific components of the proposal. And if you include a list of people that might be knowledgeable about the proposal who are not conflicted, by the way, it may be helpful for a more substantial review of the proposal. The other portion that is particularly important is information about collaborators and other affiliations. I already mentioned conflicts of interest. We want to make sure that you include all of your collaborators and all of the affiliations of those persons, as well as your own affiliations if you have adjunct positions, for example, to identify whether or not there are conflicts of interest, because that is one of the things that we worry about and you'll hear a lot about during this grants conference. So next slide, please. So these are the sections of the proposal that we'll cover, and I'm not going to list them all here because it is a rather comprehensive set, and they are all described in the PAP guide that has been mentioned before. So that is one of the documents that you need to be very, very familiar with. Even if there is a solicitation that tells you what the program is about and has guidelines, you need to be aware of what the guidelines are in the PAP guide. If there's a conflict between the solicitation and the PAP guide, follow the description in the solicitation as a rule. And if you have any questions, as Jean has already mentioned, ask early and ask often. The often part sometimes is because the program officers are so busy they have a hard time checking their emails or phones and getting back to you. But please be persistent because that's why we are here. The next slide, please. Okay, so the cover sheet is not a section that I'm going to dwell on, other than to say that it is largely pre-populated when you are starting your proposal, but there are some elements that are important that we look at. And it's one of the first things that a program officer or a reviewer is going to see when they start reviewing your proposal or seeing where your proposal should be reviewed. So for example, if in this cover sheet at the very beginning, there's a designation here of the solicitation under which it's being submitted. In this case, it's the PAP guide. If there's a solicitation that you're submitting to, the solicitation number will be listed there. Also, the program, in this case, a chemistry program, is listed there. And this is where the proposal will be directed for the proper review of your proposal. It may be that there's more than one program that will be proper for your proposal, and there will be a continuation there for you to select a secondary or tertiary program. I will just emphasize, especially in some of the programs that I work with, that we encourage having secondary or tertiary programs if it is a cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary proposal. But if you go too deep, it becomes somewhat meaningless. So having 2 or 3 programs, if it's multidisciplinary, might make sense. But if you have 3, 4, 5, 6 different programs or divisions, the designation may be a little bit more meaningless. So again, on the cover sheet, there is a title that you enter. I will just say that NSF is somewhat sensitive about the titles. It should be a meaningful and understandable title because this is publicly accessible, but it also should be something that will not draw too much ire from our sponsors who might find that some of the things that NSF funds are not necessarily for societal benefit. So please make sure that you try and identify a meaningful title for your particular project. The one thing that I will mention is that the requested amount is listed there, and that is also something that's an important piece of information for us to see right from the get-go. Please make sure that that budget entry is consistent with the budget that is entered in the budget pages. I know that it's supposed to be, but it isn't always, as is my experience. So it's very important so that when the proposal comes in, we get a good understanding of what you're asking NSF to support, how much. And you'll hear more about the budgets along the way, but my standard mantra is to ask for what is needed, no more and no less, and what you can justify. We often get questions about what is the average request in a particular program. Averages have a large deviation in many cases, so always ask for what you need and no more and no less.
There is a whole section on this slide that has a bunch of checkboxes on it. And those help the foundation understand some of the nuances that may be included in a given proposal, whether there are vertebrate animals, whether there are human subjects, historic places, et cetera. So it's very important that you take those boxes seriously because there are implications for each of the boxes in terms of how the foundation may process that proposal. So I did want to make folks aware that all of those are on there and they all do have a meaning to us at NSF. Sorry, Randy.
No, thank you, Jean. That was an omission on my part. And that is very, very true, especially in things like the vertebrate animals or the IACUC, whether or not that is needed, because that does have a very important implication on the way the proposal is reviewed. Thank you. Okay, next slide. So the project summary, many of you know that NSF requires that projects address the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. And this section, the project summary, is where, at least at the very beginning, you can address what is the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of your project in a very concise way that the program officers and the reviewers will understand. This is easily one of the most important sections of a proposal because it gives a very concise description of what you're planning to do. There is a section for an overview, and you need to make sure that that is also understandable to technically savvy, but also someone who's not necessarily within your discipline, reviewer or program officer. We get thousands of proposals and we don't have expertise necessarily in every aspect of what you're proposing to do. So speaking to a generalist and also to a person with a deep knowledge is a challenge, but it is something that is a skill that you need to develop when you're writing proposals. So these text boxes must contain an overview statement and the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. And I applaud our colleagues in policy who have changed this section over the years to include very specific sections. It used to be incredibly difficult for us to parse through a very dense project summary to find out whether someone had separately addressed the intellectual merit and the broader impacts. Now it is much easier. And in fact, research.gov or Fastlane looks for these and will not accept proposals if in fact they have not separately been addressed. So again, I applaud internally our own staff for making this possible. It is also the case that some project summaries require special characters, for example, in equations in mathematics or even chemistry that need to go into a project summary. Think about whether that's necessary or not. But if it is, you can upload a project summary separately as a PDF document. I believe that's as a supplemental document. Okay. Next slide, please. The project description is the meat of the proposal, really, and it's typically 15 pages unless there's an exception listed in the solicitation. It can go in some cases, for example, our mid-scale research infrastructure, the full proposal is up to 20 pages. But in almost all cases in solicitations, the project description is 15 readable pages. And I mention readable pages because sometimes PIs try to pack in as much text as they possibly can, making the entire proposal, the project description, almost unreadable. And it really angers reviewers when they have a hard time reviewing very dense proposals that don't have separation of paragraphs, for example. The PAP guide lists the requirements for the lines per inch and the fonts, and just think reasonably is my main point, because you don't want to start right off the bat by angering the people who are going to be reviewing your proposal and have them sit there and be having difficulty just reading your proposal, let alone understanding what it's trying to say. So take that to heart, make it a readable proposal, concise, and your proposal is likely going to be much better than if you try to pack as much information in as possible. The project description must have a separate section on intellectual merit is basically what the project description is about, but it must have a separate section calling out what the broader impacts are. And it also needs to have a section including results of prior NSF support. It's important for reviewers to understand what you've done with any prior NSF support. The requirements are listed in the PAP guide, so follow that as you need to. If you haven't received any NSF support, that's okay, But if you have, make sure that within the time frame listed in the PAP guide that you describe what the results are. Also, URLs are something that people put in project descriptions, but the requirements here state that you should not include URLs. And the reason for that is simply that URLs are a means to circumvent this 15-page project description requirement. There's no obligation for any reviewer, any program officer to click on a link in a proposal, because it will then take you to some place that may not even exist by the time the proposal is submitted. But also it will provide additional information that is outside of the 15-page limit of the project description. And it's important to realize that NSF, while we are a government agency, we are not a bureaucratic agency, I would like to say. We don't do things just to make life difficult for you folks. We do it to provide fairness in the proposals that we receive. It's not fair for one person to have extra space when the other hundreds of people who submit to a particular program don't have that option. So we try and provide a fair environment for all of our scientific investigators out there. So it's not because we're trying to be sticklers. It's simply because there's a requirement to provide good stewardship of taxpayer dollars and make sure that there's fairness across all areas of science that we support. Okay, next slide, please. And references cited. This is required, and this too is something that has changed over the years. It used to be that there was one format that was required, and that didn't matter whether or not it was a format used in your particular scientific discipline or not. That has changed. So the references cited must follow accepted scholarly practices, and that is a big advantage. But my other point here that I really will make is that the references cited should not be a compendium of everything that you have done. Your proposal needs to put your project in the context of what is happening in the field, not just what you have done, but what others have done and why this particular project that you're proposing is going to be important for not just you, but for the science across the nation and across the globe. So I have seen too many proposals where the references include only work that has been done by the PI, and there's no context as to why this particular project is important and what others have done in the field. So that's my soapbox that I'll stand on in terms of references cited. Next slide, please. And biosketches. This has long been a source of questions by prospective PIs because it was very short in the sense that it was 2 pages and there was a lot of information that was asked. Now it's up to 3 pages and there's a standard format. So please make sure that you use the templates that are provided for biosketches for all senior personnel. So again, senior personnel are defined in the PAP guide. So please take note of that. And I think that's my section, and I will turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks so much, Randy. You made some absolutely key points during your presentation that are worth mentioning again. And that's the whole point of equity and making a level playing field for everyone submitted. Everyone is treated by the same set of rules and requirements. It's not about bureaucracy. It's about treating everyone the same. And so I very much appreciated that comment. We're now talking about the budget. And obviously, the budget is talking about how much money you're requesting by category. And there is a separate component that goes into more detail called the budget justification. If you include any of these budget categories, just as an absolute best practice is to have a parallel, more description of what you're asking for in the budget justification. And I think that's probably one of the most important takeaways to the budget document. The document also has a series of budget categories that I'll go to in the next slide. But I will also reference here that if you do have a subaward that's contained in your proposal, each of those subawards also must include a separate budget justification of no more than 5 pages for each subaward. Let me also provide a little context here in terms of the budget. The budget is used as part of the review process to help identify whether the PI or group of PIs and co-PIs have adequate resources to carry out the project as proposed. And that's precisely what this section of the proposal and facilities, equipment, and other resources that I will be talking about shortly are intended to do. If the reviewers and program officers need to understand whether you have everything you need, whether it's on the budget or facilities, equipment, and other resources to carry out this project. And this is particularly an area where reviewers sometimes comment about what they see on a budget. Another comment that Randy made that probably summarizes it better than anything else, and that I was going to already say, is ask what you need. That's what should I include? Should I overestimate? Should I slim it down to make sure it doesn't look like it's too much money? No, as I said before, this is used to assess whether you have the adequate resources. So ask for what you need, no more and no less than what you need. Next slide, please. So the important point to emphasize about the budget is that the PAP guide, as has already been mentioned, provides the basic guidance that you follow regarding preparation of the budget. But there also may be important guidance in the program solicitation, budget categories, for example, that they think are particularly relevant for that particular program solicitation and any proposal submitted to that. And when you're thinking about this, this goes back to no more and no less. The amounts should be realistic and reasonable. They should be well justified. As I said, if you put a category in the budget, make sure that budget justification provides the justification for why you need those funds and what they will be used for. And then again, as the topic has said above, the program solicitation may indeed contain specific guidelines that you have to be consistent with. And it's very, very important that you look at the solicitation. There is a budget section to ensure that it is very clear on what you can and cannot ask for. So there are eligible costs that are identified on that budget. And one of these categories that I believe is worth mentioning and providing more detail on is the personnel category. So NSF has a policy, which I can tell you, working closely with other federal agencies on standardization and harmonization of our proposals, that we do have a distinct difference in the area of senior personnel. And that basically, our policy limits compensation to 2 months from all NSF funded grants. So it's not just this proposal. If you are already getting funding for another proposal that's being funded by NSF, that is counted in that calculation as well. So it's 2 months across all NSF grants. And then we also tell you that you can ask for more. But if you do ask for more, it must be disclosed in the proposal budget justified in the budget justification, and then has to be specifically approved by NSF, and it would appear on your award budget. So that's important information for you to keep in mind in preparation of that section of the proposal. Again, 2 months across all NSF funded grants, and actually grants and cooperative agreements, any awards you receive from NSF. And if you need more, you really have to justify that need in the budget justification. Obviously, equipment, there may be a limitation in the solicitation on request of funds for equipment, so bear that in mind. Travel, this is the travel that you believe you and your colleagues, the total amount of travel that you are asking for funding. Let me answer a question that we often get. Well, I want to attend a conference, but it's 3 years out. I want to take some graduate students, but I have no idea about how to budget that because I don't know where the conference will be held. What you select is worldwide, and that will get you beyond that need to identify a specific location. Probably one of the most misunderstood categories on the NSF budget is a category called participant supports. And this budget category refers to direct costs for items such as stipends, subsistence, travel, registration fees, etc., paid to or on behalf of participants or trainees, not employees, in connection with NSF-sponsored conferences or training projects. These are not people that are absolutely just going to work on your proposal. They're undergraduate students. These are a different category that we call participant supports. And so please bear that in mind when you are completing this portion of the budget. Obviously, there are other direct costs, again, subawards, consultant services, computer services, publication costs, where we go into the PAP guide into great detail. In fact, on every one of the budget categories identified on the budget has its own specific section in the PAP guide that provides very clear guidance on what the category is and guidance on how to complete that section of the budget. So please, I can't emphasize importantly enough the reading that section of the PAP guide when you are putting together your budget. Next slide, please. Now, NSF is also unique from other federal agencies in that we have a foundation-wide cost-sharing policy. And the reason that NSF is unique in this regard is that this is a policy that was put together by the governing body of the National Science Foundation, the National Science Board. And they put this policy in place to, again, going back to that equity word, to make sure that there is a level playing field among all of the organizations that submit proposals to the National Science Foundation, so that one can't put, oh, we don't really need a budget, we're going to, only ask for a very small amount, where another entity will not be able to do that. Again, it's getting back to a level playing field. And so we tell you, as part of the board's National Science Board's policy, that inclusion of voluntary committed cost sharing is prohibited in solicited and unsolicited proposal. That is unless it is mandated by a statute, by the National Science Board, or by the NSF director. And at this point in time, there are only a whopping 6 programs at NSF that require cost sharing, and that will be specifically identified in the program solicitation. So unless it's one of those 6, Cloud Access, the I-Core program, Randy's Major Research Instrumentation program, the Robert Noyce Scholarship program, engineering research centers and the EPSCoR program, you are not permitted to put cost sharing on the budget itself. To be considered cost sharing, it must meet all the standards of what the federal government uses, 2 CFR 200, as the administrative and cost requirements, audit requirements that are applied to all federal agencies. And it identified what constitutes cost sharing. And one of those elements is that to be voluntary committed, it has to be on the budget. So there is a line on the NSF budget, a line M to be precise, and it is grayed out in FastLane and will not be visible in research.gov unless it is one of those 6 programs that I mentioned. That being said, during the board's discussion, it was decided that an organization may, at their own discretion, not at NSF's prompting, not at anything about NSF asking you to do it. This is at the organization's discretion. They can continue to contribute any amount of voluntary, uncommitted cost sharing to an NSF-sponsored project. That means that it is not on the budget and it is put in most frequently, and where we tell you to put it, is the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. And that is where you identify, for example, if you are receiving lab space, if you are receiving funding for students from your organization, that is where you're going to put it. Now, let me go into a little more detail on that now. Next slide, please. So this is the facilities, equipment, and other resources, and it's used to assess the adequacy of the organizational resources available to perform the effort proposed. So as I mentioned before, our reviewers and our program staff are going to be looking at the budget and facilities, equipment, and other resources to determine whether you have the necessary resources to carry out that project as proposed. And it is very important that you understand that there are in the PAP guide specific requirements that we specify. We are not so much asking in terms of facilities, equipment, and other resources as quantifiable amounts, but rather the types of resources that would be provided by you or one of your partner collaborating organizations should the proposal be funded. So this is a section of the proposal that frankly, a lot of folks don't spend a lot of time on, but it's critical in terms of understanding whether there are indeed the resources available to complete that project. Next slide, please. A section of the proposal that is vitally important is current and pending support. And this is required for each individual identified as senior personnel. And it asks for information on all current and pending support for ongoing projects and proposals. It also asks for information on any in-kind contributions that you are receiving that may help have a better understanding. Now, what do we use? A better understanding of what we use this information for. And the information is used. And we do this for every section of the PAP guide. We tell you what the section is used for so that you understand how reviewers and NSF will be using that information. Well, current and pending support is used to assess the capacity of the individual to carry out the research as proposed, as well as to assess any potential overlap or duplication with the project being proposed. There is two NSF formats that are currently acceptable, an NSF fillable format, as well as a format provided in Science CV. which is a National Library of Medicine system that allows agencies to develop their formats in that system. So you have to use one of those two. But it is vitally important that you complete this and take this section of the proposal seriously. So folks often ask, well, what does it matter if I have a lot of funding, or isn't that unfair to me if I have a lot of funding or I don't have a lot of funding? The bottom line, it's important for you to be honest and comprehensive about what it is. Judgments are not being made on that aspect. If you go to the next slide, this is a document that has been put together by NSF. It has been in use for a few years now, and it is probably the best cheat sheet available on what you have to report and what you don't. So on this, and there is a link to it in the PAP guide, and you will notice it has a very recent date of April 20, 2022. We take this information very seriously, and we want to make it as easy for you to follow to ensure you're providing the information that we need to help assess capacity or overlap duplication. So across the top, you'll find top bar, you'll see the type of activity, and then various sections, the biographical sketch, current and pending support, facilities, equipment, and other resources, and 2 post-award categories where you may also need to update this information in project reports and a post-award information term and condition for information that was not reported at the time of proposal submission, but should have been. There is also a category called disclosure not required, and this gives you information you need. So as you go down, you're going to find your undergraduate, graduate, postdoctoral training, including location, major area, degree, and year is provided in the biographical sketch. Your academic, professional, or institution appointments, whether or not remuneration is received, and whether full-time, part-time, or voluntary are also provided in the biographical sketch. And the list then goes on. There are multiple pages of this document, but I strongly, strongly encourage you to take a look at this table before you complete the current and pending support section, and really all the sections of the proposal, because you're going to see that it is useful in many parts of the proposal. Next slide, please.
Okay, so continuing on to the sections of the proposal, and realize that there's a lot to take in here, but it's all here on the slides, and it's all listed in the PAP guide. So I just encourage you to take a look at all of these sections and think about all of these sections well before you plan to submit a proposal. Doing it at the last minute can be overwhelming, and it will make for a less compelling proposal. So please take a look early. Look early, look often, I guess, is a phrase that I'll just mention. So I've already mentioned the supplemental documents, and it's technically it's the special information and supplemental document sections. So I'm going to talk about that. There are various components to that. So if you can go to the next slide. The first one, and it's a source of much confusion, and I prefer to have this listed as statement of collaboration. People always ask about letters of collaboration, letters of support. And I will take some credit for this, because long ago in the major research instrumentation program, we did away with letters of collaboration and called it a statement of collaboration, and had a statement that is very similar to the one that's listed here. And now it's been adopted across the foundation. So when you have a collaborator who's going to contribute to the project, both in terms of intellectual contributions to the project, permission to access a site, use instrumentation or facilities, offered furnished samples, materials for research, whatever the component of their contribution will be. That should be listed in the project description or in the facilities, equipment, and other resources section. Places where you are supposed to have a set limit on what the intellectual merit and broader impacts of the project are supposed to be. That is not to be included in a separate letter of endorsement or a letter of support, as has often been the case in proposals. So the statement of collaboration that is included now says very concisely, if the proposal submitted by Dr. name of the PI, entitled, whatever the proposal title is, very concise and elegant, as we talked about earlier, is selected for funding by the NSF, it is my intent to collaborate and or commit resources as detailed in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. It is important to not try and take additional space to fill in descriptions about the proposal. So that has often been done in additional letters of support. And as listed here, this statement must not recommend or endorse a project. If we wanted a review of the proposal, we would ask for a review of the proposal. And if it's a collaborator, they would be conflicted anyway. So please make sure that this statement of collaboration is concise and follows the guidelines as listed both in the solicitation and in the PAP guide. And as I said, if I have any legacy at NSF, I hope this is one that lasts for a long time. Next slide, please. Another one is mentoring of postdoctoral scholars. And again, there are always a lot of bullets on slides, so I'm not going to delve into every last detail. But I do want to mention this first one that says the proposals that include funding to support postdoctoral researchers must include a description of the mentoring activities that will be provided for such individuals. And I really like the way that this bullet is written because, as Jean had mentioned, I coordinate the Foundation's Major Research Instrumentation Program, which does have a cost sharing requirement. And oftentimes a postdoc is provided as cost sharing. And the way that it has been interpreted is that if you ask NSF for postdoctoral funding support on line G5 or whatever the line is on the budget pages, that you have to include a postdoctoral mentoring plan. But if you provide it outside of that budget page, you don't have to provide a postdoctoral mentoring plan, and that is not the case. So this bullet is very well written in that it says that proposals that include funding to support postdoctoral researchers must include a postdoctoral mentoring plan. We'll talk a bit about what that means. It's not just about mentoring a postdoc in terms of doing the research. It's making sure that they have backgrounds for professional development after their postdoc has finished. So I will leave it there on this slide, but it's a maximum one-page mentoring plan that will be reviewed under the broader impacts or the intellectual merit by the reviewers. So it is important to include it if in fact you must. The last bullet is also important. I'll just say that for collaborative proposals, separately submitted collaborative proposals, and you'll hear more about that during the grants conference, the lead organization must submit a mentoring plan for all postdoctoral researchers submitted under the entire collaborative project. So you don't need one for each individual component. It's the lead organization that must submit a mentoring plan for a separately submitted collaborative proposal. So you'll again hear more about that over the course of this grants conference. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that it goes above and beyond just making sure that a postdoc knows how to undertake research, which hopefully their PhD has provided them with that experience, but they need to have a mentor to make sure that they are not just flailing on a day-to-day basis, but have a concrete set of goals for the research that they're undertaking. But some examples, and when you list examples, it suddenly becomes a checklist, but these are just examples that may fall under the mentoring activities. One is providing career counseling and training in the preparation of grant proposals, writing grant proposals. As you can see, it can be an overwhelming task, especially if it's done at the last minute, and when something that is not overwhelming if you prepare for that process. Training in responsible professional practices. Ethics in science is becoming certainly much more, I won't say important, it's always been important, but it's been much more in the spotlight lately, including research integrity. Those are activities that may fall under postdoc mentoring. Developing publications and presentations, something that's pretty standard in most scientific disciplines, but oftentimes graduate students, postdocs, even faculty members are left on their own to undertake those activities with varying quality of the presentations or the publications. So offering guidance on techniques to improve teaching and mentoring skills. That is something that is incredibly important, and it's not something that even a faculty member themselves is well versed in. There are many courses, there are many ways of improving teaching and mentoring skills. So if postdocs who are destined for a teaching career or some element of teaching in their faculty lives, if that's what their goal is, it is important to try and improve your ability to undertake those activities, including public speaking, because even if you don't go into a faculty position, you may end up at a company and your ability to convey thoughts is an incredibly important thing and may help you in to advance in your various skills, your various job activities. And also providing counseling on how to effectively collaborate with research from diverse backgrounds and disciplinary areas. That too is also something that is incredibly important. Working with teams that don't look like you necessarily or think like you, that is important. Next slide, please. And data management plans. Just stated here, all proposals are required to include as a supplemental document, and there's a section listed for that, a data management plan of up to 2 pages. NSF has long had a policy on dissemination and sharing of research results, and has become much more formalized in terms of being written down and requiring a plan to conform to that policy. And that has been around for a number of years now. Make sure that you include a data management plan. It will be part of the intellectual merit and the broader impact review of the proposal. It is possible to also include a statement that says no detailed data management plan is needed, as long as a clear justification is provided. Okay. I caution you to state that no data management plan is required because reviewers will look at this section, and it's not very common to have that, but it is possible. So just think clearly about whether or not you want to go that route. But if you have a question as to what a data management plan looks like in your discipline, because it can vary across disciplines. There are databases in certain disciplines where you're expected or encouraged to include your data so that others can look at it for, again, research integrity, making sure that results can be confirmed. Can you go to the next slide, please? There is a page listed in the PAP guide for various disciplines, for example, in the geosciences and physics and so on, about what the expectations are for data management plans. So please take a look at that. And if you have any questions about what's appropriate, please contact your program officer. As we say, ask early and ask often. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that mantra again. I will say, again, this nominally means if you have lots of questions, ask your program officer. Again, that's why we are here. If you don't hear from your program officer, also ask often, because I'm guilty as perhaps most, if not more than many of the people at NSF, and having a hard time keeping up with my emails when people ask me questions. So please, it doesn't bother me if you ask often, but I do encourage you to ask early. As I've mentioned, there's a lot of information, a lot to know about to write a good proposal. It's not just writing a proposal, you want to write a compelling proposal. And to do so requires a lot of thought, and it requires you to start early. So starting right at a deadline, if there is a deadline, as was referred to earlier, it makes for a poor proposal, and you don't want to submit a poor proposal because it just will not fare well. So ask early, ask often, and now we'll open it up to questions from the participants.
Okay, I'd like to welcome back my colleagues to join us for the Q&A. We've been answering a lot of your questions in the Q&A. We've received a lot of questions.
My fingers are tired.
What we're going to attempt to do in this Q&A session really is to answer or pose questions that we believe will be of benefit to most of you who are attending and listening. A lot of questions might be something that you direct to a program officer of one of the funding opportunities that you're interested in, if it's very specific. And so we won't be able to answer all of those questions. I also put in the chat some existing resources. Many of the questions that we get are questions that we receive very often about proposal preparation. And we do have existing resources on our policy office site, and I put some links in the chat to a lot of those FAQs. So hopefully you'll be able to, at your leisure, take a look at some of those. So I've picked out a number of questions. We've got a few minutes to go over some of these, and I'll just pose them to the panel. Certainly have more than one person speak up to answer some of these. So the first question that I have is something that we received early on, which was, if I don't understand the funding opportunity, who should I be contacting for assistance?
Well, I'll start and I'll ask my program colleagues to weigh in, but typically, and we get these questions at policy@nsf.gov, if there is something in a given funding opportunity, typically a program solicitation, because that's where the requirements can differ from the PAC guide, we would recommend you pose those questions to the cognizant program officials identified in that document. They wrote it. They're the ones that's going to handle the proposals that come in response to that solicitation and are best able to answer those. There are times when they get very specialized with regard to eligibility or cost issues. And we work with program, and the policy office ends up sometimes answering those. But Jennifer, Randy, anything to add?
No, totally agree. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Randy.
No, sorry, no, that's okay. I will just add that at the very beginning of solicitations, there are the listings of the cognizant program officers. And in many cases, there's more than one. Mm-hmm. So people usually start at the top. That it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best place to start. And if you don't hear from that person, start your way working down and ask any of the other program officers that are involved in the funding opportunity.
Yeah, and so especially some of them are broken out by which directorate that program officer might be related to. So I would pick the one that might be closest to your own discipline. I will also say we're throwing around a lot of like program officer, program director, program manager, all the same thing.
All the same thing.
Same thing. So don't be confused by that piece either.
We officially use program officer, but there's a lot of directorates that use the term program director. Again, same thing.
Okay, next question, we'll get into kind of budgeting a little bit, but what might be the best way to budget the contribution of researchers who won't perhaps have the role of being a PI or co-PI, but still contribute significantly beyond just, contribute significantly to the project?
Well, there are two parts to the budget. Part A, which is senior personnel, and Part B, which is other personnel for the project. So if they are literally someone that meets our definition of senior personnel in the PAP guide, they are substantively involved in the leading and the direction of the project, they would be put in Part A. They meet the definition of senior personnel. If they are someone that, for example, is not in that category, often undergrads, grads, postdocs, technicians, et cetera, then they would go on Part B of the budget. But if you put them in Part A, that means they're going to have to submit collaborators and other affiliations, a biographical sketch, as well as current and pending support for that individual.
I would add too to that in GEO, a lot of the times collaborators, they don't need salary, but you might be supporting their field work or their laboratory. And so there are other ways in the budget to include those costs, even if they're just providing a letter of collaboration and participating, but you're not providing salary to those people.
And similarly, if they're not in some way identified there and they're not getting money, they can be and should be in facilities, equipment, and other resources, so that reviewers do have a sense of what all the resources will be available toward that project should it be funded.
Okay, the next question is asking about current and pending support, and specifically, how should matching funds and sources be noted in current and pending support?
Okay, so let's make it clear that what we are trying to find out in current and pending support is whether the individual or team has the capacity and whether there's any overlap duplication. So depending on those matching funds are often included as in-kind contributions to the project. But there is a lot of information on the table that was discussed in the section, and it would be worth going into that to see if the category or activity is listed rather than the particular source of the information, because it really isn't, the issue doesn't address per se cost sharing or matching. It's more about external funds available to the individual to carry out the work.
Okay, I know I answered a number of questions that were asked about using URLs in various sections of the proposal. And so I saw one that came through that said, can we use URLs in the data management plan? So I just thought it would be good just to get maybe have that discussion on the use of URLs in NSF proposals.
And I'd like Jennifer and Randy, since they actually deal with the proposals coming in, to address that based on what they've seen.
Yeah, I mean, Jean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the policy is that you cannot include a URL. That you cannot include a URL. And I have sent a proposal back, not returned without review, but we'll say, we found this in here, could you please remove it from the proposal? Because what you're doing is pointing the reviewers and panelists to external information. It's sort of a way around the size limit, right, in the proposal. So we do look for that. When a proposal comes in, we do what's called compliance checking, and we make sure that there aren't URLs in there. I know it's frustrating, especially when you do want to point to data holdings and what. I don't know, Randy, what your experience has been with this.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in the context of the project description, but that is not the only section of the
Right.
proposal that has a page limit.
Right.
And anytime you use a URL, you are circumventing the page limits. And it's difficult, as Jennifer mentioned, we do compliance checking. And it's very difficult to check for everything, especially in large programs. As I mentioned, I deal with the Major Research Instrumentation Program, where we get upwards of 800 proposals for each competition. And checking and having proposals modified to get rid of URLs is not necessarily very practical or feasible at that level. So we sometimes don't check those things, but we do tell reviewers you are not under any obligation to click on a URL, and we encourage you to not click on those URLs because it circumvents the limits of those page limits. Ideally, they would not be there, and they should not be there. So if you do not include them, you will win extra points, if you will, for not irritating the reviewers. And I've mentioned that in another context earlier. One of the worst things you can do as a PI is to irritate your reviewers, not on the content of your proposal, but just on the format of your proposal, because people do it correctly. And those people, reviewers tend to love when they're reading the proposals. And if you don't try and cheat the system, reviewers will tend to reward you. I'll just say it that way.
There is one caveat to put to all this, and that is there is a page limitation in the biographical sketch. So what people are talking about is very valid, but in specifically the product section, we do actually ask for URLs if they are available. And the reason for that is that the purpose of the biographical sketch is to assess the, whether the individual or team has the necessary qualifications to carry out the research. And those products can be useful in helping that determination. But that's the one caveat to that rule.
Okay, next question is actually asking us to dispel a rumor. And that is, they've been told that, I guess they're saying early career faculty or beginning investigators can apply to NSF and NIH at the same time for the same project. Is this true?
Do you want me to answer that?
I mean,
I will answer that question.
Well versed on that.
Yeah, I will answer that question. Typically for all directorates, but the Biological Sciences Directorate, you can simultaneously submit your proposal to a number of funding organizations at the same time. For the Biological Sciences Directorate only, you cannot submit your proposal for simultaneous consideration unless you get the approval of NSF or NIH, or you are a beginning investigator. And that is identified in the specifically in that section, in the path guide. And what you will then do is check the box for beginning investigator on the cover sheet so that they are aware that you are declaring yourself as a beginning investigator. Now, again, let me emphasize, this is for purposes of the Biological Sciences Directorate only. Otherwise, for all other directorates, you could submit to NSF and NIH or NSF and DOE or any host of other partners at the same time.
A couple of budget questions that I'd like to pose to Jennifer and Randy, and that is, first question is there a good ratio to follow for the various budget categories? For example, should no more than 50% of the budget be for personnel, for example?
That really varies. It depends on what you're proposing to do. Depends on the program. And that's another time where it's good to talk to other people who've been funded in the program, talk to the program officer. But it really varies. You might have something that's very salary driven. You're really just like doing a bunch of modeling and you have all the resources you need except for computers. Or maybe you're proposing something that has a ton of field work or lab expenses. And so it just depends on what kind of science you're doing and what the project is. That's really, unless it's specifically outlined in the solicitation that you're required to have X number of students, or you can only have X number of, anything. But if it's not listed, it's really up to how you design your project.
Yeah, I will add, and I mentioned it earlier, and Jean emphasized it as well, to ask for what you need, no more and no less. But part of that is the fact that NSF awards tend to be over $100,000 for 3+ years. So that's several $100,000 that we're asking you to manage. So you're not just being asked to be a good scientist or engineer, you're being asked to be a good project manager at some level. So you're not at the level of building a big observatory or laboratory space necessarily, but just managing people and the resources that are needed for the research. So putting a number into a formula is not a good way to demonstrate that you are a manager, that is someone we want to give taxpayer dollars to and to make sure that you do a good job with them. So not just ask for what you need, no more and no less, but also demonstrate to the reviewers and to NSF that you are a good steward of taxpayer dollars, and doing so by asking for the right things to accomplish your project.
And I'll just take this opportunity to add a reminder to ask for what you need in the broader impacts as well. We expect you to be a good steward of the science, but you should also, if you're proposing significant broader impacts that require resources, ask for those. That also shows that you have a commitment to managing that part of the project as well.
The next question is somewhat related and may be the same kind of answer, and you can just tell me that and I'll move on. But this is also trying to get into the minds of reviewers. So, and the question is asking, are equipment costs, how are those viewed by reviewers? Are they viewed as less favorably by reviewers than other costs?
I will start out with that, and that is because major equipment requests tend to come through the Major Research Instrumentation Program. And that has a minimum request of $100,000 or even less for primarily undergraduate institutions or the fields of social behavioral economic sciences and mathematics in any type of institution. So you can ask for equipment as part of your research grant, but just bear in mind that if you're asking for larger scale equipment, you'll probably be referred to other programs at NSF, for example, MRI. But if you need smaller scale equipment, one question that often comes to mind is, why is this piece of equipment or why are these resources not something that a university itself will provide as something that is just very accepted as being commonplace at a university? Now, there are under-resourced universities and colleges that may not be able to provide those kinds of equipment, and that's a very valid request. But if you ask for small-scale equipment that is less than what MRI is asking for, you do run the risk of prompting the question as to why the host university is not able to provide some of the resources for the faculty in general.
And I'll just add that in the infrastructure and instrumentation specific solicitations, like all of the core programs within the Division of Earth Sciences, we allow up to $50,000 in equipment to be included as part of the proposal, as long as you justify, like Randy said, why is it that NSF needs to pay for it, and also how is it an integrative, critical piece to the project that you're proposing to do? Not just like, oh, I'm building my lab and I want this, and also I'm proposing this research, but how is it integrated as a part of what you're specifically proposing to do?
Jennifer,
So check
that's a
that
great
solicitation.
point, but I really am going to follow on with a question of my own, because I know people in the audience are going to have this. How do they, is it in your funding opportunity? There's a $50,000, excellent, thank you.
It's in the solicitation, clearly stated the limit. Yep.
Because
So
people are going to wonder, how do I find, if a program does have a limitation, how do I find it? And that is the typical response, is that it has to be explained to the community in that way in the actual solicitation for it to be upholdable, because otherwise there's no way that those putting together the proposals would be aware of that. So thank you for that answer.
you're welcome.
I'll add just if you talk to your program officer well in advance, they will be able to tell you whether any kind of request is acceptable to that program, even if it isn't in the program solicitation. So different divisions, different directorates do things differently. So I applaud Gio for doing that, but it isn't necessarily done that way in all divisions, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, let's tackle a couple of questions on salaries. The question is, if senior key personnel are not requesting funds on the budget, but they do have time commitments, how is that differentiated from cost sharing?
Well,
Jane?
go ahead. You want me? Yeah. Well, here's the bottom line. What we say is, if you're asking for money on the budget, or if you're asking for funding, and it's either not the full amount of funding, or your name doesn't include it all, that is not considered voluntary committed cost sharing, because those amounts of money are not on the budget. It would be considered voluntary uncommitted cost sharing, and you would need to have that reflected in facilities, equipment, and other resources regarding that person's contribution to the project.
Okay, we've got time for a few more questions. I've got a few here, so more than a few.
Yeah, more than a few.
Question is, can faculty from foreign countries be co-PIs on an NSF proposal?
Well, I will answer that. If the individual is, if an individual is affiliated, employed by a U.S. institution of higher education, their home country is not reflected. They are considered a member of the U.S. scientific and technical community. So they're working for Ohio State, they're from another country, that's not relevant. If, however, they work for a foreign organization, then the rules are different, and we talk about that in the eligibility section of the PAP guide for foreign organizations. And it's not that they cannot be included, but there are justifications and explanations that must be provided that are considered by why it can't be done here kind of activity, kind of question. Why is it not best done by a U.S. institution of higher education? And so that is what the focus is. It's not the individual necessarily. Number one, it's their organization submitting the proposal. And number two, where on the budget that information is being requested.
Okay, next question is, can we send, your proposal is declined. Can you send it back to the same program after you've revised it based on reviewer comments?
Every proposal that is submitted is considered a new proposal. Some divisions, like again, the Division of Earth Sciences, do have policies that are posted on the NSF website that say you cannot resubmit a submitted proposal within 1 year of the first submission. So you want to make sure you understand the resubmission policies of whatever division or program that you're submitting to. And some programs have limits on how many times you can apply to that program, like career. You can only apply 3 times. Randy, there may be other things that I'm not thinking of. But.
No, that
Yeah, I
one
will.
answered it from my perspective.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to add whether when you say revisions, it should be substantially revised based on reviewer comments. If you just change the dates on a proposal, that is not substantially revised to deal with a new fiscal year, for example. But the comments that Jennifer made are all very, very valid. And yes, they are considered to be new proposals. One thing to consider is that NSF does not use, generally, to my knowledge, standing panels. So the reviewers are new each year. So you will not necessarily be speaking to the same set of reviewers that gave you the reviews that led to a decline. And there are questions that we often get as to whether you should, at the very beginning of a proposal, address the reviewer comments or just revise your proposal to deal with the comments as the reviewers suggested. My impressions from the reviewers is that they don't like, and my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, but reviewers don't like to be told at the beginning of a proposal what other reviewers have said. Otherwise, why are they there? Because they're the brand new reviewers. So I would advise you probably not to list at the beginning how you address the prior reviewers' comments, because that tends, in my experience, to irritate the current set of reviewers.
I 100% agree with that. You're also drawing attention to flaws that have been pointed out in your project in the past. So why would you do that to yourself?
Yeah, anecdotally, that's exactly what we've heard in the policy office as well.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Here.